Vietnam heated their foods with C4. Let me explain. Before MRE or meals ready to eat were invented, soldiers had C rations. These rations could be eaten cold but were often heated in boiling water. In a pinch, soldiers would break off chunks of C4 plastic explosive and light them on fire to heat their food over it. This sounds crazy to many, but C4 is actually extremely stable and worked well for this purpose. Personally, I would be skeptical of doing this, but these men were built different. This is a testament to how tough situations can spark ingenuity, and how comforts such as warm food were important to the morale of the troops. You may remember hearing about the one-child policy in China. Did you know China was not the only country with this population control initiative? Vietnam, Iran, and Singapore are some other places that historically implemented one- and two-child policies. British Hong Kong also strongly encouraged families to have 2 or less children. China's one-child policy was the longest and most overbearing, spanning decades, and has since been revamped to allow up to 3 children in 2018. This policy is the reason so many Westerners were able to adopt kids from China, because the Chinese government forced mothers to abandon their kid if they violated this policy. The negative effects of this policy on the population range from gender imbalances, an aging workforce, and a more risk-averse culture. The most successful con man in history, George C. Parker. Targeting optimistic, trusting, or otherwise confused immigrants, he convinced people in New York City that he was the owner of landmarks, and therefore had the ability to sell them to people who did not know any better. Many immigrants coming into America were promised amazing opportunities upon arrival, so something that may have sounded too good to be true was believable to them. Parker was able to convince people to purchase the Brooklyn Bridge, the Met Museum, Madison Square Garden, and even the Statue of Liberty. Parker was eventually convicted of fraud, and one time managed to escape a courthouse disguised as a policeman. Once he was caught on his 4th and final fraud charge, he was sentenced to life in prison at Sing Sing. The terrifying reality of dive bombers in World War II. If you couldn't tell from the name, these planes would dive straight down at their targets, pulling up at the last second to drop their bombs and fly off. The pilots would start at about 20,000 feet altitude and dive down on enemy ships, which appeared the size of a housefly from that height. The steep attack angle meant that they gained tremendous speed, and when pulling up at the last second, pilots experienced between 4 and 8 G-forces, enough to make your body feel like it weighs over 1,000 pounds and could make you black out. The reason this tactic was used was so that the enemy could not get a clear shot on the plane as it was approaching. If pilots pulled out of the dive too low, they could be hit with their own bomb fragments reflecting off the boats. The Dauntless dive bomber was a favorite amongst the U.S. Navy and was used heavily in the Battle of Midway to sink Japanese carriers. Imagine being the tail gunner on this plane, feeling yourself falling towards the ground with your back facing away, not knowing if you will live or die. You have probably heard about Coca-Cola having a special ingredient in it back in the day, but did you know this was not the only soda to have drugs in it? 7-Up contained lithium citrate, a mood stabilizer, until 1948. 7-Up was marketed as a hangover cure when it first came out. In higher doses, lithium was used to treat mania, depression, and bipolar disorder. It was even marketed for children to drink. It is crazy to think that this was regularly available in a soft drink back in the day, and anyone could just buy it, whereas nowadays you would need a prescription for this. What happened to the NFL during World War II? 600 players went on to serve in the war, and at least 20 of them died in action. During the attacks on Pearl Harbor, 3 football games were in progress. The announcer had to interrupt the game and tell all the servicemen to report to their units. In some seasons during the war, as few as 8 teams played. In 1943, only 7 players were available for the Brooklyn Dodgers, so players had to leave retirement and play in the games. Teams such as the Eagles and Steelers had to merge due to this loss of players, forming the Steagles, while the Cleveland Rams suspended their games. A lesser-known merger was Card Pit, where the Chicago Cardinals merged with the Steelers as well. The war had such a massive impact on everyone, even professional athletes and their coaches. Kowloon Walled City was just 6 acres and had 35,000 people living in it. Although development in the area had existed for centuries, the city had a great population increase in the 1900s. It contained many residents fleeing the Chinese Civil War. The large influx of people led the British to have a hands-off approach on the city. This lack of governing meant there were no building codes to adhere to, which was an extreme fire hazard. Drugs and violence were rampant, and the Triads gang maintained a large status in the city. Unlicensed doctors and dentists could operate within the city without fear of being prosecuted. This eventually prompted over 3,500 police raids in the 1970s. The city was located inside British Hong Kong and was demolished in the 1990s when Britain gave up rule over Hong Kong. Rocky Bleier played for the Pittsburgh Steelers as running back when he was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War. His platoon was ambushed, and Rocky was shot by a rifle in the left leg. While he was down, a grenade landed near him, sending shrapnel into his right leg. He was told he would never play football again. The owner of the Steelers, Art Rooney, sent him a postcard in the hospital, saying the team needed him. He was discharged from the Army in 1970 and returned to Steelers training, where he had trouble walking without pain. He was down to 180 pounds and was kept as a reserve player. In the off-season, he was able to bulk up to 212 pounds and became a member of the Steelers' starting lineup. Rocky Bleier persevered and went on to rush 3,800 yards in his career, score 25 touchdowns, and played in the first 4 Steelers Super Bowl victories. Pigeon-guided bombs and missiles during World War II. During World War II, the U.S. military faced a challenge, hitting targets accurately without fancy tracking systems. Their solution? Pigeon-guided bombs. Imagine pigeons trained to hone in on a light on enemy targets. Strapped to tiny bombs, these feathered warriors would steer themselves straight for the target. Researchers plan to use head-mounted cables to translate the pigeons' pecking into steering commands. The National Defense Research Committee donated $25,000 to the project, dubbed Project Pigeon, but it was eventually scrapped for more advanced electronic guidance systems. He fought in World War II with a sword, a longbow, and a set of bagpipes. An officer of the British Army, Mad Jack Churchill, would often lead charges wielding his large claymore sword. He once overpowered a Nazi soldier and used him as a human shield where he forced the surrender of 42 other soldiers. Mad Jack was captured by Nazis when his crew was struck and injured by mortar fire, while he was playing Will Ye No Come Back Again on the bagpipes. He was transferred to a prison inside Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Mad Jack and 3 other officers escaped the camp through a tunnel, but were recaptured again. During a transfer of prisoners, Churchill was able to escape the Germans and walked 93 miles to Verona, Italy, to unite with American troops. After World War II, he went on to serve in British Palestine, where he notably evacuated over 700 Jewish doctors, students, and patients from a hospital falling under attack. In his later years, he became a passionate surfer in Australia.